What fan theory do you 100% accept as true? Glinda dropped Dorothy's house on the Wicked Witch of the East, not the tornado, and uses her to gain control of Oz. One of the first things Glinda tells Dorothy is that she killed the witch. They praise her so she'll accept it, and when the Witch of the West comes along, who killed her sister, Dorothy. Glinda then puts the ruby slippers on Dorothy's feet but does not tell her that she can use them to go home. Instead, she sends Dorothy to Oz in possession of objects that a witch would murder her for. Dorothy, being forced into a situation where her only salvation is Oz and her worst enemy is the Queen, inadvertently exposes the Wizard of Oz as a fraud and murders the Witch of the West. Now, who's left to rule Oz? Glinda fucking Witch of the North. She used Dorothy as an expendable pawn to gain control of Oz without having to leave her bubble. And when Dorothy is done upheaving the two biggest powers in Oz, Glinda sends her home and makes her think it was all a dream. Hell, the Wicked Witch isn't even that evil, she just wants her sister's shoes to remember her by. This is just wicked, but Glinda is less of an idiot, more evil, and ends up ruling Oz anyway. Not the book. I don't remember what happens to Oz there. This was a Reddit post a while ago actually, but the theory was, in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke tells R2 to stay in the ship at various times, he doesn't stay put, because the last person to tell him that was Anakin and he never came back. My favorite R2 theory is that in A New Hope, when he and Obi-Wan meet again, that unlike Keppo, R2's memory was never erased but they pretend not to know each other. This is obviously because the finer details of the prequel trilogy weren't ironed out when A New Hope was originally released. Now the widely accepted fan theory is that Obi-Wan says nothing because he doesn't want Luke to know who he is and what his relationship was to Anakin, so as to keep him from being corrupted by the influence of the dark side. Whereas R2 doesn't give anything away because he ain't no fucking snitch. Edit, a word. Or Mr. Bean is an alien. That would explain his weird behavior and why he falls out of the sky at the beginning of every episode. This is actually confirmed in the animated series where we see numerous Mr. Beans in a UFO. Not an angel instead. He falls from the sky to the sound of a choir. My own theory that in The Office when Andy proposes to Angela, the people playing his parents are different actors because they are literally actors. As in, he hired them to pose as his perfect parents because his own parents couldn't be bothered to come. The people in the season 9 episode Garden Party are his real parents, who clearly are dicks. This would actually make more sense. There's a talking head where he mentions his father had an affair by saying if it weren't for secretaries, I wouldn't have a stepmom. I always assumed it was a continuity error or that his biological mom and his stepdad were at the engagement and his stepmom and biological dad were at the garden party. But the way he interacts with them and his brother at the garden party and over the phone point to them being his real parents, making it a continuity problem. Your theory actually clears most of that up. Dennis Reynolds is a serial killer. Dennis Reynolds is a bastard man. Barney from How I Met Your Mother isn't actually as much of a womanizer as Ted says he is. Ted's an unreliable narrator and could have presented this image of Barney to his kids either because he was jealous of Barney's relationship with Robin, or because he wants Barney to look unsuitable for her. That way, Ted's kids see Ted and Robin as soulmates. I've heard the theory that Ted put all his one-night stand stories on Barney so he doesn't look bad/manipulative in front of his kids, meaning like 50% of the stories of Barney manipulating women are Ted lying to women to get laid. Bill Cipher is still alive inside Stan Pine's mind after the ending of Gravity Falls. The clues leading to this conclusion, from fans, were so complex. They actually involved traveling to real locations and solving puzzles. God, I fucking loved that show. I cried at the finale, I was so sad it was over. I mean, after getting his brain wiped he's able to easily recover his memory. This would mean his brain wasn't fully wiped, so Bill most likely is still somewhere in there. Miles Morales is considered a death omen among Peter Parkers who are aware of the multiverse. Edit, here's my explanation. alright. As the other commenters are stating, Miles usually succeeds Peter as Spider-Man after Peter is killed. This happened in Spider-Verse, the Ultimate Comics, and I think it's implied that the same thing happened in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, though in an alternate universe. Not to mention, I bet a lot of people were expecting Peter to die at the beginning of the Miles Morales video game. Now, in Rick and Morty, a show in which the multiverse plays a huge role, alternate versions of characters tend to fulfill the same role which Ricks are generally aware of. Jerry's are awful, Morty's are stupid but necessary, Beth's must always be treated with kindness, etc. We see this in Spider-Man 2. Uncle Ben gets killed, Peter is romantically involved with someone with the initials M. Or Gwen Stacy, who usually meets a tragic end herself, he has a best friend named Harry Osborn who oftentimes ends up as an adversary, though may generally mean well. You get the idea. From here on in, it's pretty much all assumptions, so take everything with a grain of salt. While the idea of the multiversal community of doppelgangers is more often associated with Reed Richards, with the Council of Ricks even being a pun on Marvel's Council of Reeds, I personally believe that Peter may have the intellect to discover safe multiversal travel, make use of it and establish a similar community. And if these Peters can travel the multiverse, they may notice the patterns that we ourselves notice in all of these Spider-Man stories. Including Miles taking up the mantle of Spider-Man after that universe's Peter's, usually violent, death. Maybe they treat their Miles getting his powers like we would being diagnosed with a terminal illness. Now that being said, it may be possible that some Peters may not save their Miles or prevent him from getting his powers in order to save themselves. Personally, I think this can be explored further by having a villain who is hunting down versions of Miles from across the multiverse. There was a precedent with Wolf Spider from the Ultimate cartoon, though he was interested in hunting down all spider people for his own megalomania. This Wolf Spider would be hunting Miles either in the name of vengeance for all the Peters or believes he is saving Peters who have yet to die, in a perverted sense. This is just a thought I had a year or two ago and would really like to see it explored. Miles pops up Peters, or shit. Please elaborate. This is a little out there, but hear me out. The year 2015 we see in Back to the Future 2 is what would have happened if not for Chernobyl. Which leads to the argument that something in the movies, specifically 2 and 3, caused Chernobyl to happen. As you know, the year the characters are from is 1985, with Chernobyl happening in 1986. My take is, learning of the Libyans' attempt to procure plutonium, the Soviets send a spy to Hill Valley to learn more in order to prevent destabilizing relations during the Cold War. The spy arrives late, and in the timeline established by just the first movie, leaves. This is the timeline we see in the second movie, which is eventually erased. However, Doc Brown meddles with time again, and causes the events of the second and thus third movie. The spy witnesses the end of the third movie with the flying train, and assumes it's a new sort of aircraft. He investigates the scene after the main characters depart and finds wreckage of the DeLorean. Among the wreckage is some parts of the destroyed fusion reactor. Relaying findings to the Soviets, they get the impression that the US is significantly ahead of them in nuclear development. To combat this, they aggressively greenlight a bunch of nuclear projects, including a risky test that results in the Chernobyl meltdown. The resulting event scares people the world over and hinders nuclear research and progression. With lack of funding and roadblocks to more nuclear proliferation, fusion technology is never developed. Thus hampered, the timeline turns into hours. In the 2015 timeline shown in BTTF2, the nuclear research breakthroughs make the rest of the technology possible, including flying cars and hoverboards. With some developments happening in the late 80s, the economy is lifted and the downturn of the early 90s does not happen. This has an effect of extending the garish fashion of the 80s forward, hence why the clothes look different as well. So we live in the bad ending? Ooh, this one is cool, I like it. Pepe Sylvia is just Charlie trying to pronounce Pennsylvania. The creators said this wasn't canon, but they love the theory so much that they wish it was real. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.